Okay, in this video we're going to talk about two different things. We're going to touch on the gradient tool and the paint bucket tool. First, starting out with the gradient tool, if we switch over to that, we'll hit the keybind G to get to it. And we have a list up here. These are a list of our simple presets that we have available for us, and by default it's set to the foreground to background. So any color that we choose throughout here and change between the foreground and the background, they actually take on up there. And actually, I'm sorry, if you click on the down arrow, this is where you get it. If you actually click on this, this is where you get to get more granular with your gradient. And by granular, I mean the smoothness. Say adjust the smoothness. How smooth do you want it? How defined do you want it? If you want to add more points, you can definitely do that by clicking that little button there. This is, like I said, this is more of an advanced way to go about it, but you definitely have these options available at your disposal if you'd like to do that. Deleting, you click on the one you want, delete. So this is how you create your own custom gradients. There's a lot of gradients that I normally keep myself. I'll make a gradient and I'll save it. And when you do, you say, I want to keep this forever, I can just create new, and it drops it in your little presets up there. So let's set this back and say that's what we want to do. We hit OK. And so now we have our preset back here that we want to use, but I'll just for general purposes, I'm going to switch to our default foreground background. So now where do I want to put this layer? I'm sorry, where do I want to put this gradient? Switching to the gradient tool while we're there, if I hold down my mouse button and click and drag, it lets me drag this line. Well, when I let go, it throws that gradient. Well, it threw it right over top of our flashlight, so that covered it up. So we don't want that, so we're going to hit Control Z to get back and say we want to use it as our background. So we'll click on the bottom below that and create a new layer, or you could do it right over top of layer 0. It just depends on how important you're making layer 0 a priority. So we'll click on layer 2, because like I said, everything should be created in its own layer. And we'll start from the bottom. We'll drag it to the top, and notice how it's kind of at your own discretion. You can't really get a straight line. To constrain that and actually get a straight line, you hold down Shift, and it's what you'll find yourself doing a lot with gradients. So I'm holding down the mouse button and I'll let go, and so that drags the gradient there. And these are actually terrible colors. Let's switch to something a little bit more subtle that seems to make a little bit more sense. We'll choose I myself am a big fan of the slate gray. So, or not slate gray, but I think slate blue. So we'll use that, and then we'll actually go in and pick one a little, we'll sample this there, pick one a little darker, and we'll use that. So now, when we throw that gradient, it's a little bit better. And if you go the opposite direction, it uses the opposite colors. So, that's basically how you throw a gradient in places. That's how you make backgrounds for things look really well. Now there's different modes of gradients. There is the linear gradient, which is the one we just used. There's radial gradient, which you see a lot. Now if you throw a big radial gradient in the background here, you can't tell much of a difference, but there is a curve right there. So what I'll actually do is I'll throw one like this, and you can kind of see a very subtle curve. Now if you want to see more of a dramatic curve, I'll make a really small one, and that's what a radial gradient really looks like. So so there's that one. And then if we come back up here and check them out again, we have the angle gradient. That one's not used a whole lot. Let me back out of here. I don't find myself using the angle gradient a whole lot, but this is what it looks like. It basically gives a hard contrasting edge right there, and then does kind of a clockwise or counterclockwise motion onto the foreground to background color. And then if we look at the next mode that we have here is reflected gradient. We'll throw that in there and show you what that pretty much looks like. I gotta do it on a smaller one here. Now that will take our foreground color and kind of put it as a pinstripe or a stripe in there. So that's kind of how that one works. This one, I believe, what is this one called here? The diamond gradient. Self-explanatory as well. If we let go of that one, it throws a diamond in there. So a lot of these can be used in very different ways. Again, you have to really experiment with them to play with them. Most commonly used, like you'll see a lot of Apple products, they just pick those very, very subtle gradients, like this. And then if we go into our background color, and then we'll sample this again, but just only slightly change it. And then we'll grab our radial gradient, and we'll put a nice big one in there. And so it kind of gives you that, it gives you a very, very subtle gradient, and subtlety is key in a lot of pictures these days. Contrasting edges are a little rough to look at, so that's why gradients are around. Now if we go over to the paint bucket tool, let me get rid of this layer here. Paint bucket tools does the same thing most people would think the paint bucket tool does. I'll switch over to a nice light blue, and it will click and it'll basically just fill in any area that it sees of the same color. So if I go over to the if I head on over to the flashlight and go to a different color there and start clicking OK, well, it kind of, you see how the tolerance up here is kind of the same thing as a magic wand, but except for it's with the paint bucket. If that makes any sense, I hope it does. There's a lot of tolerances that you'll start to see, but it kind of picks out that same color. Now if I were to increase the tolerance on that quite a bit, it starts selecting more of that color range. So we've talked a lot about tolerances, so now by now you should be able to get understand a little bit more of it. And we can also do patterns and let you pick a pattern that has predefined patterns. You can go in here and play with these as much as you want. This is kind of like the same as a brush except for a pattern. If we append that, we can pick out a rock pattern and click there, and now we got a pattern going on. So there's also a lot of things you can do with the paint bucket tool. So get in there and play with that. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I don't use the paint bucket tool as much as I should, but I do throw gradients quite a bit. So so get in there and play with gradients. Throw some really pretty gradients as a background in there. And you can even use some of these presets. Some of these presets I don't find too attractive, but maybe somebody does. I don't know. Just I guess it depends on your style there, and that's what Photoshop's all about, is your creativity, not mine. So that's the gradient tool, and that's the paint bucket tool.